How's everyone doing? I know this is the session after lunch, so you're all relaxing in your seats that can recline, which is amazing. Um, I did want to do a little shout out to Wait But Why. I don't know if you follow this blog, but I follow it pretty religiously, and it will explain why I'm using stick figures in my presentation. But I think what that blog does really well is explain complex subjects in a very simplistic way from a visual manner. So that being said, I'm gonna admit, as I was trying to come up with this presentation, I went through, an existential crisis multiple times, and I'll tell you why. So one of my friends who I used to work with at Pinterest, he called me up a few months ago and said, "Hey, I'm gonna write a post called The Life and Death of Product Marketing." And I think in my head, I had never questioned our function before. So just this feeling that, like, what do you mean death of product marketing? That I never thought it was dying in the first place. And, we actually had dinner a little bit later, and he went through his points. And what I can say is, if you ever read his blog, it's called Casey Accidental. He goes through why he thinks product marketing as a function is perhaps evolving, or in his words, going dead. He specifically says this is more from a consumer perspective, and that's the perspective that I come from, and less from the B2B side. But overall, it just kind of like made me think a lot about what is the job that I do, why is it valuable, and like why do other people feel that maybe we're not as valuable. So when I think about the topic that I propose, so establishing the product marketing function, share best practices on how to help younger organizations realize the value of product marketing. This completely filled me with dread, honestly, because I just want to make sure that like I provide actual lessons that you can take back, because what I do definitely feel is product marketing dead? No, pathetically, right? So, but what I've realized is that if you want product marketing in your company to be a function that delivers a lot of value, you have to have a strong function to begin with. And so what I'm going to share is just my journey of how I came to certain lessons, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. And just another disclaimer, I kind of thought we would be in a breakout session type of environment, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I know it's kind of a weird environment to ask questions, but feel free to ask questions. All right, so what do we do? I think you've probably seen in a lot of different sessions, like how do we define product marketing? I put into these three rough buckets that most people would agree with here. So inform the roadmap, what do we build? Drive the go-to-market, quarterbacking the go-to-market process, how do we bring it to market? And then scale and adoption. So how do we actually get customers to use it? And the way I think of things is pretty much how a lot of people think about their product, but what I would say is in the world of tech and the world where tech has gone to, it's changed a lot in based on how products are rolled out today. So this is like your typical product lifecycle, and us understanding where we fit within the product lifecycle is really important to understanding how we actually bring value to the organization that we were in. So from this, you can see informing the product roadmap, and this is just my experience, but the more PMMs contributes to the insights that actually define the problem space for the PM in determining what we actually build. And then as you go into kind of product market fit land, prototyping, beta, and then eventually to the general availability, that's what the PMM leads, the overall go-to-market strategy. So the positioning, messaging, what is the narrative we want to go out with. And after we find this magical thing called product market fit, which is the stage where we feel a feature or a product set is actually helping drive value for the business, so it's driving growth for the business, not just for the feature itself, but the feature in the sense of like, does it help with your overall stickiness to the product or retention or brings in users? The moment we know it's driving that, that's when you go into the scale and adoption stage. So this is where we might take a little bit less of a driver's seat, but we contribute to the multiple campaigns that a lot of different teams are driving. So Think of brand, growth, performance, whether above the line or below the line. The whole point is getting that feature into these other types of campaigns that other functions might run, so people actually use it. And the other part is really thinking about if you are in sunset mode, or you figure out how do you go back to the start of the life cycle, which is how do you innovate so you prevent sunsetting or the decline. Cool. So that's basically how I orient myself in terms of how I think of product marketing and what our job is. And I'll go through my journey to explain how I landed there, and then also why it's important to set that framework to educate our cross-functional partners of what product marketing does and how they come in at different times. So my journey. So after college, I went to Microsoft. I started off in the APM program, so as a product manager. And the first thing I worked on was actually bringing Windows Vista to the world. So does anyone remember Windows Vista? Yes. If you know what happened to it, it was one of the biggest duds that Microsoft ever launched. And not only that, it was 2 years late, so it took 5 years to market. Usually there was a 3-year product life cycle bringing Windows platforms to the market. So it was 2 years late, and they had to roll back a bunch of things. It was just kind of a disaster when they were putting it out on the market. No one understood why they even built certain things. So it was just a little bit of like, cool, why do we do it this way? And a lot of it kind of just like, the wow is now, which was the campaign. And what I realized is that they didn't really have the end user experience in mind. So Microsoft at that time was really, and still is, very good at the B2B side of things. How do we talk to enterprise customers? How do we talk to OEMs? How do we talk to developers? But not as good as what is the end consumer experience? What needs are we solving for them? And what was interesting a few months later is when Apple released their Mac versus PC campaign. Do you guys remember that? And for me, it was interesting because Apple does a really good job of thinking about that user experience, delighting them, and then they're really good at the messaging and positioning, so you know exactly who they're trying to target with their messaging. So, a year later is when they released the iPhone, and I just remember we were at a conference and Steve Ballmer is like, no one's gonna buy this, and the truth was like almost half the employees already had one, and it was just a really good lesson in just trying to understand like who is our user, and if we actually know who our users are and what insights are driving kind of like what product needs we're solving for them, then we could actually save a lot of money on engineering costs, on the time it takes to go to market. But without a real like end user insight in mind, like sometimes it just gets very muddled, and you have a competitor like Apple who comes in and obviously delivers a much better experience. Cool. So after 2 years there, I decided to leave Microsoft, and a lot of it was trying to think about where the future of technology was going. And I was really interested in transportation, urban planning. My dream job was actually to work on Google Maps. So I went to Google, and I think what was really interesting about Google was, coming from Microsoft, where it is a CPG world, where packaged software goods, you come to the Web 2.0 world, where it's like, just see what sticks. And it was a whole new way of bringing features to market, and it kind of changed the way a lot of how we think of maybe like traditional marketing, because sometimes we would only have like a few weeks to figure out how we actually like take this feature that the PM didn't tell us about, and then we had to like bring it to market, and we had to package it up and make sure it still lands. So there was a lot of this kind of like service center perspective of a PMM, where at one point I was mapped to like 10 PMs, and it was just like I could only think in like 2-week horizons of like, what are you launching now? Okay, let me like get a blog post, get a video, and it was just like that kind of engine. But it made me realize like there was more that we can do, but if you are very strapped from an organizational perspective, like you kind of end up being only in this go-to-market land. So it is something to think about as you actually try to think of how do you create a more valuable, stronger function. So yeah, I don't know if you saw Martin's presentation yesterday, but it is very much like we had a simplistic idea of what marketing is, know the users, know the magic, connect the two. What I loved about it was it was just so fast-paced and instant, and you can see people interacting with the products that you were marketing. And we were in what I realized, we were in a very special land where budget wasn't as much of an issue. But what we did learn was actually like with very little money, you could scale your message very effectively. And I think that's what you saw in Martin's presentation. But the idea is you could be very scrappy and still make a really big impact. So yeah, so that's when I decided, so about 5 years at Google, I decided to leave, we call it leaving the mothership, and kind of go into startup land. And my hiring manager at Pinterest at the time, it was like the siren call of startups, which is come and you can do whatever you want. And like you're the decision maker. And that sounded really fun. I would be the first PMM at Pinterest. And I think what I soon realized as I joined, it was like, hey, I'm the new PMM. And I was naive to think just people would assume or would actually know what that meant. And it was just like, oh, like, we're trying to join the proverbial table. And there was a couple new people that I've never worked with before. So growth, for example. How many people work with a growth team? And the growth team has engineers. Okay. So in some other marketing organizations, growth is called performance marketing. But with the digitization of marketing, more and more growth teams actually have engineers now where they can build what they call MarTech stacks, so you can automate and do a lot of marketing with less people involved. But so I had never actually worked with a growth team before. There was also a brand team, so trying to understand like how I interacted with the brand team, and then obviously the product team, which was what I was more familiar with. But yeah, it was just like kind of a weird feeling where it's like, oh, I could do whatever I want, but actually my first job was to articulate the function of product marketing and get people on board. And it took a long time to actually even start executing. So I think part of it is if you are going to like a more smaller startup organization without PMM, it's like just knowing that like step one is that you shouldn't assume anyone knows what your function is. So part of your job, at least at first, is to actually tell people what you do. And this is kind of like, Pinterest were a little passive aggressive. So I'm like, what the hell is growth? They are saying they make the landing page. That makes no sense to me. Growth, it's just like, the other people are just like, what the hell is a PMM? And I remember my first interaction with Ben Silbermann, who's the founder of Pinterest, was like, he's like, oh, you're here. Like they told me I need a PMM. I don't know what you do, but I'm glad you're here. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like, so knowing at the top level, the perception is like, I have no idea what you do. And then even at the peer level, like there's a lot of people who are like, I have no idea what you do. It was just a very like jarring experience because that wasn't what I thought I was getting into. And there was a lot of this, which is like, I do this, which is, like talking about the product lifecycle. And it was like, oh, I do that too. And you kind of look at each other, and then it's like this weird turf war. And it's very draining because you just want to execute, and then you realize, oh, I have to like play nice with this other function when I don't know exactly what they do, but they seem to be doing marketing, but they don't call themselves marketers. So there's a very good lesson in how, like how you work with these cross-functional partners, and especially the new ones that are popping up. So if you think about growth, it's a pretty new function, even like data science, UXR, a lot of these things where they're emerging functions, and they have their own issues with trying to explain their function. But I think part of it trying to understand the entire marketing stack and the different teams that are emerging from it. So I think you probably heard this from other sessions, but lesson one, I didn't even know how to articulate what I was good at, if that makes sense. So like coming in, it was just like, oh, I just thought you know that I do this, and I think this is what I do, and like I swear I bring value, and I think like the more you yourself know what you're really good at, and can stand for that, like I think that's very important. So I just did like a Pokemon style, but I, to the extent that we know the market, we understand the customers very deeply, and then not only that, we understand what they probably need, so we can form the product. To the extent that we are very good at messaging and communication, that we can set a narrative that people will respond to. And then there's a project management of go-to-market, which is the quarterbacking, where there's all these different stages. You need to bring in so many different cross-functional partners. And to the extent that you connect everyone and it's a very smooth landing, that's also a skill set. And then to the extent that you understand the full channel mix, you understand how to get the message across in that channel mix to the right set of customers. These are all like different skill sets that I could only articulate through Pokemon monsters, but to the extent you can explain that to people and people understand, at least on a high level, what you mean by these things, then it'll help kind of like guide how you understand what their superpowers or unique powers are, so you can all work together at one point. So yeah, so after a year at Pinterest, I had always wanted to work at Uber because I definitely felt I was like at the forefront of technology and transportation. And I got recruited to actually work on what we called at the time Uber Everything team. I think there's a couple people from Uber here too. And what was really interesting is the first year I was there, PMMs were there from, I would say like day 0, day 1. And it was a PMM, a PM, and product ops. I had never worked with product ops before, but it was really fun because we were in the stage where it was like pure product market fit, where like, what do we actually build? Why are we building this? Who are we building this for? And what is the way we prioritize things? And how do we actually bring it to market in one city, 5 cities, 60 cities, that kind of thing. And because we were there from day 1, marketing was established as a function from the beginning. So there was less of a, why are you guys here? Like, what do you do? And more of this kind of like, oh my God, without you, we could never have succeeded. So I think it was just like interesting to come to a place like that. And that requires someone at a more senior level who has worked with PMM and fully understands the function. And usually it's a product lead. So to the extent that you have someone who is an advocate for you from the beginning, it'll make your job easier. But you should definitely suss out whether they even have, they understand that value. And so if they don't, then your task is very clear. So after a year there, I actually joined the core Uber team, which is the ride sharing. And that was interesting in the sense of like, hey, I'm here. And they're like, why do we need PMMs? We're like really successful. We found product market fit. Our business is growing like crazy. We have we have no idea why we need a PMM. And I think like in hindsight, if they've seen like what we brought to the table, like it would be very clear why you need a PMM upfront. Because a lot of the way that Uber and even like Facebook and other companies, like with that Web 2.0 feeling of like just break things or see what sticks, doesn't work really well, especially in the real world, because like people don't like change, they don't like surprises, and I think having a PMM upfront would help prevent a lot of that and mitigate the change aversion and build actual trust between the customer and the brand. So yeah, so I think that goes into what I think is another lesson. I've experienced a world where like, growth has a lot of leverage because not only do they own the performance marketing dollars, they sometimes now have started to own the own channels, so email and the like other types of like push notifications. So a lot of times if you think about those channels, in a previous life that might have been under product marketing. And without those levers, it kind of diminishes our ability to impact the business if we have to work with another function to actually get access to those channels. And what I've learned from my experience is just that with a growth mindset and today's kind of definition of growth, it's very short term. They're not necessarily, and it's not because it's bad or anything, it's just like they're goaled on very more short-term metrics. And to the extent that a product marketer thinks about the relationships with their customers as a long-term investment, our ability to counterbalance this notion of growth at all costs is really important. Because the downstream effects of having a growth at all costs mentality is that you will pay for it with kind of like the eroded brand trust in the long term. So I think it's just really important that there is a counterbalance. It's not easy, but this is why it's so important to be at the table, because you're one of the few people who can articulate the customer's voice and be empathetic to the customer's needs compared to the other people at the table. So yeah, so I kind of see growth like they have, their growth engine. I don't know if you've seen Little Shop of Horrors, but it's just like, you just like keep feeding it. And sometimes like with Lyft and Uber, these are ride incentives. And like it's great to have coupons as a customer, but eventually you just start to think of both of them as discount brands. And I think it's just like being able to understand when you deploy growth in the way they think about, and then when you also make sure that it has like the long-term view in mind. So I don't know if you watched the movie or the play, it ends up being this huge monster where it's just like, it's hard to contain because it grew so much. And I think that's what's happened a lot in the like recent tech culture, and it's just being aware, because that makes our role even more important. Cool, and I just want to reiterate, it's all about advocating for the long term, because I think there's not as many functions that are thinking about the long term. Sometimes even PMs are just thinking about shipping their product and like leaving it, versus a PMM should think of like the whole customer journey. Lesson number 3. So, we've seen a lot of talks about go-to-market, the playbook that we want to deploy. And I think like a lot of times what you should realize in terms of the evolution of product marketing is typically you're brought in from a go-to-market perspective. So to that extent, to own the go-to-market, which can be a very broad definition, I would use it broadly. That allows you to get access to creating very visible things that are seen by external and internally. So then you can, once you establish that, you can like move upstream and downstream. And this is like a slide I've seen in another slide, but a lot of times what happens in the very much smaller companies, PM does the marketing, they realize they have too many things to launch and they're not good at messaging, so they bring in product marketing, and the initial job is just to launch products and messaging. But the overall kind of value we can bring is to be way more strategic, know which customers we're building for, what they need, and then even be more responsible for P&L to the extent that we can use a channel mix to grow the product. And so there's another diagram of that where PM's doing everything in the beginning. Ideally, you would have a PMM up front. That just usually doesn't happen. They bring in a PMM, and the North Stars really have this really trusted relationship with your PM, which takes time. But once you do have a trusted relationship, they bring you into the fold so you can do the upstream and downstream. So I'll give you an example at Pinterest. I talked to you about like Ben saying he had no idea what I did. We launched this feature called Guided Search, and it was from the press narrative, it was the first time they like stopped thinking of us as like a scrapbooking company and actually potentially a competitor to like Google Image, right? And for him, that was really important, but it also set the tone for a different position for the brand in general. And he was like, oh, like, wow, I kind of get what you do now, and how do we do more of that, right? So it was just a way to like insert kind of the function in, because go-to-market is supposedly supposed to be owned by PMMs, and that's like more of an industry standard. So I think to the extent that it's very visible, you own that, and then have some few wins, you can start proving credibility for the function. Yes. All right, lesson 4, company alignment on the product journey. So I'm gonna be honest, this is something that I'm trying to do at Lyft right now. It's not easy, but essentially it's trying to think of like the whole product journey and product life cycle. So what I showed earlier on. So even from like a PM to PMM to like brand growth, integrated product ops, whatnot, like how do people think of the product as a journey, and then what roles they insert themselves at the different stages of that journey. So I'll just bring it back up again, which is just like, usually in the build stage, it's PM driven. PMM is a strong contributor, defining the problem space. Go-to-market PMM driven. This is assuming you've got your product market fit, which is the star. And then when you're in the growth and scale, like growth levers should only be used when you have product market fit. So to the extent brand, above the line campaigns, ops, who generally working on the field, comms and growth is driving usage and adoption of the feature in that stage. And then to the extent we can prevent decline by innovating and going back to the beginning of the cycle. But I don't think, like, this isn't like news to anyone that there's a product lifecycle, but for tech, sometimes because of the way we launch things so quickly without kind of like the typical like CPG lifecycle, it's like there's a lot of muddiness in this like product market fit stage of the go-to-market. So yep, and it's fun trying to get alignment. And yeah, I think the more upstream, the most valuable thing we can do is to have a relationship with the product team so that they come to us first to say like, so what should we build? Because we should have a much better understanding of what we should build. And if they have that type of relationship with you, then your value to the company is much higher because you can actually focus like engineering talent and resources on the features that actually matter the most, avoid a Windows Vista situation. But yeah, I think that is at the end of the day like what the highest value we can bring. So this is us at the table. And yeah, so in summary, know your unique powers as well as others, counterbalance growth at all cost mentality, own the go-to-market first, then go upstream and downstream, and then get company alignment on the product journey. And yeah, to answer the question again, like, is product marketing dead? No, I actually think even more so now, like our ability to tie things together, present it in a coherent way to our customers. So we are bringing stuff that they actually want, and then we are communicating and driving the relationship in a way that is built for the long term. Like PMMs are uniquely suited to do that. And we just need to be able to have a seat at the table. So to the extent, hopefully we can all share our stories, because I've never even been to a PMM summit before, and it's like awesome to just know that I'm not alone with my Pokemon. Yep, cool. So yeah, and happy to ask any questions or answer any questions.
Well, first, thank you. That was fantastic. So we have a couple minutes. We can probably do 2 or 3 questions. And I see the first one right there, sir. She's bringing the microphone. Thanks.
So you said to drive company alignment around the product strategy. How do you do that in a multi-product company?
Yeah, I think so. Part of it is there's the brand, and then there's usually different product lines. So depending on how complex your business is, and then within the product, there's usually different features. So to the extent that a PMM is mapped to that like a product, then that makes it a little bit easier versus being mapped to like certain features. And then yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah, company alignment actually means that the tech org, which includes product, design, and the business org, which in our case includes marketing, and growth and brand, is like across all those functions as a product is going from like, hey, what should we build in planning cycles, to the like, how do we prototype this and how do we beta test this, and then how do we actually take this to like, in our case, because we're a very ops-led company, like 1 city, 5 city, 60 cities, which is more of a GA. And then once we know like this is something we think a lot of people should use, like how do we even bring it to like above the line campaigns? But it's like a lot of different steps with a lot of different teams. And to the extent that someone can see that big picture and bless that like role clarity, I think that goes a long way.
Yep, right behind.
I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for smaller startups that are trying to lay that foundational research.
Yeah, so I mentioned with Uber Eats, when I started, there was only like 10 of us. And so it felt like that smaller startup. And I think what was awesome about that period where you're in product market fit stage is like there was a lot of role fluidity because you just wanted to get the business started. So that actually made it really fun. And then it was later when the business is growing, it's like, oh, we need to create like more of these like functions, right? So I think when you're in a very small stage, like you are kind of just playing the marketing hat in general. And to the extent like that it's going to grow the organization, like, and lay the foundation that, hey, there's these other functions that might come in, like let me set the right precedent. So it's not like a year worth of like work to untangle things that make sense, but it's just the status quo.
All right, one more time. Thank you, Dave.